Hi everyone, I'm Emily. I'm really sorry I'm not available for the live class tonight, but appreciate you guys watching my video in class. Um, so what I chose to do was the conflict resolution activity, and I made up this activity that I called a flash of conflict. So the purpose of this activity is to go through different scenarios that might be likely in group members' daily lives that would bring up any sort of conflict. So one thing that I would recommend for this activity is, or probably any conflict resolution activity, is to wait until you know the group members a little bit better. I think that specifically for the at-risk population, but any population, it would be inappropriate to dive in on the first day with a conflict resolution activity. With that being said, there probably is a caveat of working with the at-risk population that in any given activity, you're going to run into the potential for the need of a conflict resolution piece. So just being ready with that mindset, kind of you as the consultant or the supervisor of the activity, conflict resolution might be necessary at any point. However, I think this activity is really good in working with the at risk population or any population, really, in just getting the conversation started of working with an uncomfortable topic, which is conflict resolution. So, for this activity, any number of people would work, obviously, keeping in mind time constraints or number of supervisors you have available. I think around six is probably ideal. I came up with six different scenarios for this activity. Um, I think it's just important depending on numbers in terms of once I get into describing the activity, just keeping everyone involved and focused. For any youth population, that's always a struggle. But specifically, the at risk youth population might be a heightened struggle, especially when talking about an uncomfortable topic like conflict resolution. So basically, using flashcards, you would have everyone sit in a circle and hand one to each member of the group. One thing I was thinking about also, though, in terms of handing out the flashcards, is there is a potential that you would want to shuffle the flashcards and then have each group member pick instead of handing one out, just because some of them are personal scenarios, so you don't want to feel like any of the group members is being targeted by the scenario you're handing them. So again, this is up to your discretion as the person leading the activity, but as I've been thinking through it more, you can either hand out the scenarios or you can shuffle it in front of them and have them pick, depending on the sensitivities that you think are important for your group that you're working with. So, again, make sure you have enough scenarios for each of the group members that you're working with. Everyone should have one. In this activity, I have six, so that's six people participating. There's six scenarios. If you had eight people participating, you'd have eight scenarios. So here are some of the example cards that I came up with. And again, note that they should be tailored to the group that you're working with. Also, notice that I have different colored flashcards. I unfortunately couldn't find any of all of the same colored flashcards, but there's a potential that kids will think that there's a difference in the color that the flashcard is. So just to minimize all outside conflict outside of this activity, maybe just make sure you have all the same flashcards in the future. Again, super nitty gritty, but I think it's important just to eliminate all potential biases and think of anything that could potentially go wrong so that you're prepared for everything. Okay, so one of the cards is something doesn't go your way. You find yourself in trouble with a family member. You run into trouble with a teacher at school. Your close friend is ignoring you. You ask to join a group activity and they won't let you in. You get fired from your job or an alternative right there is you get kicked off a team. So again, these will all have to be tailored to whoever you're working with, ages, populations, and everything. But then probably explain before they get the cards that they're going to be handed a card with a scenario that's probably happened to them. And if it hasn't happened to them, that you want them to think about how they would feel in that scenario and what their gut reaction would be. So you go around the room and everyone who has a scenario, so let's say you get fired from your job or kicked off your team. I would say my reaction, and then everyone else in the room would raise their hand if they agreed with how I would react. So let's say I get fired from my job. I would be pretty pissed if it didn't see it coming. I would be upset, and I wouldn't really know how to speak to my boss after the fact. Let's say that was how I would react. So then if you guys would react similarly, you would raise your hand, and then we would go into the next scenario. Then we would do a second round where we use the script that I would provide to all of you on a piece of paper. So the first step of the script is 1, take 3 breaths in and out slowly. 2, rephrase to I feel blank because of blank. Then 3, think of solutions together. We could blank or blank or blank. And 4, agree on a compromise or a situation that ensures both parties get along. So in this scenario, I guess I kind of already did it, but I would say, I feel upset because I didn't see this coming. I would go and speak to my boss and say, what happened? We could talk about potential solutions. You could help me find another job. I mean, this is a whole different scenario. Then in terms of getting fired or kicked off a team, you might not agree on a compromise, but maybe work out a solution where if you put in X amount of hours, if you got kicked on a team, if you kicked off a team, if you put in X amount of hours doing community service or working towards improving a specific skill, maybe that would show your commitment to the team and you could be let back on the team. So those guidelines for the script are based on Rainer Martin's work on effective communication and owning your message. I think a lot of the time, the reason conflict arises in the first place is because of miscommunications and the sender of a message misinterpreting or misunderstanding how a receiver is receiving the message. So because a message isn't clear, taking ownership of your feelings and your understandings in a scenario would be really helpful towards conflict resolution in general, and I think a really solid skill for any population, especially the at-risk population, to understand. I think so easy for any youth to, let's say your close friend is ignoring you. I wouldn't be surprised if any population were to say, well, I'm going to ignore them, or I'm going to just go do things without them, or just be angry and not want to speak to the close friend. I think that's a natural reaction for any population of people. But especially for the at-risk population, I think that they run the risk of, without having effective conflict resolution skills, to then perpetuating that throughout the rest of their life into just a continuing cycle of remaining at risk. I think if they had effective communication skills and especially effective conflict resolution skills, that could just open up a world of possibilities for them in the future. Naturally, like I mentioned before, some things you want to consider with this activity are time. I mean, if you're expecting a solid response to each of these scenarios, I'd want to say probably give everyone the cards, give everyone a minute or two to think about how they would react, go around in the circle and read everyone's cards, go around again and rephrase it and see if that makes them feel better in terms of working through the problem in the future. You're probably looking at, for 6 people, 20 minutes for an effective activity. And then if you had more time, you could switch off the cards, have everyone say their reaction to all of the different the scenarios. Also, in terms of group size and time, I think that 6 is probably a good size in terms of ensuring that you have a rich discussion. If you are if you do end up getting that discussion going, any more than that might be kind of distracting for everyone to follow along. I think it's important as the supervisor of the activity for you to really be hearing what they're saying, their reactions would be in these scenarios, because I think that tells you a lot about them as people and the environment that they're a part of, as well as making sure that their friends are listening or the other group members are listening, in terms of seeing if they're actually engaged, as well as if they actually are understanding how they would react if they're raising their hands or not, or if they're actually participating, because these are real skills that can help them in the future. I think one big thing to make note of is that conflict resolution is not easy for anyone to talk about. Making sure that you create a safe space, which is why I think it's important for this activity to be something that happens once you already know the group that you're working with. So making sure it's a safe space. If there's more than 6 people, it could get kind of rowdy. So maybe if there's more than 6 people and you have the privilege of having like 2 supervisors administering this activity, maybe break down into smaller groups. I wouldn't break down into smaller groups if you didn't have someone to supervise each of the groups, unless you felt really strongly that the kids could work through this activity on their own. I think it could get really, if the activity is successful, I think it could get kind of emotional and really let you into who these kids are as people as a whole. If it's unsuccessful, the kids aren't going to want to participate and they're going to make a joke out of it. So, like, your close friend is ignoring you. I could also see a kid being like, well, screw them. That's it. And that's how they answer. And in those scenarios, it would be your job to ask why questions or open-ended questions to get the conversation going a little bit more. But if it seems like everyone in the group is kind of having those reactions, maybe start with some more easygoing scenarios of how they would react to more fun scenarios that aren't conflict related. See if you can get that conversation going, and then transition back in to the conflict resolution scenarios. So again, it's a kind of open-ended activity, but I kind of like that it's open-ended in terms of the fact that it's really adaptable towards whatever group any of us end up working with in the future. I think this could be used for an at-risk population as well as a not at-risk population. In the long run, I think the at-risk population would benefit a lot from this activity. Just communication skills are so helpful towards working through any scenario, and especially difficult ones. So thanks for sharing. I hope you guys liked the activity. Yeah, let me know if you have any questions. Have a great rest of the live class.